Hello and welcome to the show. How long is too long when it comes to a tenancy agreement? Well, is that even a concern? Joanne Oliveri thinks so.
Property managers want to take the road of least resistance, and that is, for them, it's easier to leave the tenant in the property than go through the vacate and then the process of finding a new tenant. So typically what they do is they'll advise the owner they're a good tenant, you should keep them in the property.
Joanne makes some very good points that every landlord needs to consider on this subject, and she does that today in the show. She, in fact, challenges the fact that your property manager boasts about how long their average tenancy is, the impact on the property of a long-term tenancy, and the property's viability as an investment. A lot to cover there, and Bushy and Joanne will kick off this week's show in just a moment. And then we turn our attention to the growing cost of owning a property that's in a strata development. But before we start the show today, I want to thank our supporters and content partners realty.com.au, BMT Tax Depreciation, Know How Property Finance, and Apiro Marketing. You'll find us on all podcast players as The Property Hub, also on the Southern Cross Oz Stereo Network, also on Hot Copper, and on all social media platforms.
Property deductions can save you thousands of dollars each year. To make sure you maximise deductions, you need to work with the most experienced quantity surveyor in the country. BMT Tax Depreciation is the leading specialist in the industry. They've completed over 700,000 tax deduction schedules for residential investment and commercial properties Australia-wide. BMT guarantee to find double your fee in the first full financial year deductions. Call BMT on 1300 728 726 today for an obligation-free quote. Realty Talk and your host, Bushy Martin.
Now, most investors are led to believe that the longer the length of a tenancy, the simpler, the easier, and the better for landlords. But is this really the case? Well, to challenge the potential folklore assumptions surrounding this, we're joined by author, award-winning global property management thought leader, and founder of iRevolution, Joe Oliveri. I can't even say it, Joe. So welcome back to the show.
Hi, Bushy. Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah, and we had a great conversation recently, so we're looking forward to jumping into this subject because it's certainly one that doesn't get much people's attention, and there's a few myths, I think, surrounding some of this. But look, it's clear that long, unending leases are certainly assumed by most to be the ants pants for investors, landlords, Joe. So what's the general advice that landlords hear from most property managers when it comes to tenant and lease longevity, and why?
Yes. Yeah, well, property managers want to take the road of least resistance, and that is, for them, it's easier to leave the tenant in the property than go through the vacate and then the process of finding a new tenant. So typically what they do is they'll advise the owner they're a good tenant, you should keep them in the property. Well, what constitutes a good tenant? Is that someone who pays the rent on time, abides by the terms and conditions of, their general tenancy agreement? It's really about what the owner wants from this property. And most property, they're available, so the owner makes money out of it. So, they've got a long-term asset that they need to grow. And leaving a tenant in is not always the best advice.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought. So from your perspective and your experience then, Joe, how long is too long for a tenant to stay in a property and why?
Yeah, well, ideally, I think a tenant should be in a property no more than 5 years. 3 years is a good turnaround. And what that means is, the tenant, when they're in there, obviously there's wear and tear. And the myth is that there's more wear and tear from a tenant moving in and out when it's actually the other way around. When someone stays in the property, they become the property. And the property is suddenly, like the way they like it. And, all of this wear and tear and repairs and everything, they don't get attended to because there's no movement in and out of the property. And what happens is it tends to build up. And then the tenants, so, they're saying, well, why increase the rent when things are wearing out and, there's wear and tear? It's like, we've got to think differently about it.
Yeah, it's a really good way to reframe the exercise on something that a lot of people aren't thinking through. Can you sort of run us through a bit of an example that compares a much longer term one with an ideal one, so that we've got a sense of what that looks like?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, if we look at rent of, say, $2,000 a month, what you see, the longer it goes on, the more we're losing. So if we've got a tenant who stays in there, they renew year two, the rent might have gone up to $2,040 a month, and that's about what market is. The next year, we're going to say, they've been good tenants, we'll just increase it to $2,080. Let's do another $40 increase, and we can probably get $2,200 for that rent for that property. Then the next year, we're looking at, let's just increase it $40 more. $40 was okay last year. And now we're getting further behind because we can probably get $2,300. So you can see the longer it goes, then the more apart it becomes. And if you kind of like at year 5, what we're looking at is a $200 difference. Get to year 8, we've got about a $600 difference a month. That's a lot of money that they're losing every month. So, when you look at the numbers, you analyse the numbers, you start to understand it's okay to turn the tenant over.
Yeah, it's really interesting, that accumulated effect, both on the wear and tear, but also on the missed rent, because you're trying to be kind to a long-term tenant and look after them, but in the process, you're dudding yourself of potentially significant rent that you could be getting if you were reletting it. So very interesting. Also, you've touched on this already, Joe, but I'd just like you to confirm your thoughts on what you think is the ideal length of a tenancy then, and why you think that's the case.
Yeah. So, ideal length is 3 years, no more than 5 years. And the reason why we say that, it's not just the rent that you're using, but when a tenant moves out after, 5 years, we start to see the enormous amount of repairs and maintenance and replacement that needs to be done. So it adds up. So we've lost rent as a result. Now we've got this huge cost in, getting the property, what I say, tenant ready. And during that time, we've got vacancy whilst we're doing all that work as well. So when you add up everything, you're losing a lot of money by keeping the tenant in. And, leave it longer, and you can have repairs of hundreds of thousands of dollars or more. And I've seen this with properties. So, how long should a tenant stay in? No more than 5 years. And if you think about it, depreciation of items is every 7 years in a property. So you put a tenant in the property longer than 7 years, their entry condition report, is irrelevant when they move out anyhow. So, there's a lot of things to take into consideration there.
No, very good thoughts. I'm interested in your thoughts also, and I'm putting on the spot here a little bit, but given that there's a lot of legislation changes that are rippling out right across the country in terms of residential tenancy legislation reforms, there's a real push to ensure longer leases and longer stays for tenants, given the protections that are put around that. How are investor landlords and or property managers able to navigate and negotiate that between the legislative requirements versus the ideal sorts of frameworks that you're talking about?
That's a really interesting question, because, property managers are still reluctant to do more than a 12-month lease. Some are still trying to do 6 months, which doesn't even fall in line with when rent increases can take effect now. Yeah. So, look, we're going to go down this path. We can do longer leases, increase the rent, because I believe that property managers should be market speculators as well. We need to know where the rent's going to, and we take the market there. So when we forecast long term, we're able to take the market to where it should be. But then also, because we're doing, inspections on the property, we understand what's going on. We're helping the owner to reinvest back into that property along the way. So, it's not a shock when the tenants move out and say, my goodness, what happened to my property?
I love that. It certainly gets away from that set and forget exercise and then have a massive bill in between times, and promotes that sort of preventative maintenance approach to sort of continuously looking after the property. So sort of wrap it up, Joe, if you were to summarise your thoughts on better tenant tenure strategies, what would they be?
Yeah, I would say if you've got a rental property, then what you need to do every time that tenant lease is due for renewal, go through the numbers, have a look at, what the property manager's been picking up when they've gone and done the routine inspections or the in-resident inspections. Go through that, talk it over with your property manager. It's like, what do we need to do in order to get my property to market rent? And if my tenant can't afford to pay that, that's fine. It's market rent because that's what the market is determining that the market will pay. So don't be afraid to lose the tenant. You're not losing money by losing the tenant. Yes, you've got a cost, but if you've got a very good property management company, they'll have everything ready to go. So when that tenant moves out, we're in there doing the repairs. We've already got someone to move in. So yeah.
Great thoughts, very good suggestions, and I'm sure that's going to get people to sit up and have a long think about this. So I really want to thank you for giving your eye-opening insights to continue to question and challenge the conventional wisdom around investment properties, Joe. And as you've reinforced, there's a real need for investors to continuously take a much more longer-term strategic, financial and business-like approach to the performance of their properties rather than just adopt the assume an easy route. So thanks again for sharing all this here on the show today.
My pleasure.
At Know How Property, we're more than just the best residential and commercial loan arranger. We craft a plan for your lifestyle and future with our 3-stage strategy. We start with your lifestyle strategy. Whether it's finding your dream home in the perfect location or adding to your residential or commercial portfolio, we listen to what you want and need to do. Next, we create a financial strategy. We dive deep to uncover what you can do, ensuring your finances are set up for success. Finally, we implement our validation strategy. We become your John West of property because it's the property we reject that makes sure you get the best. Know How Property. Smart, tailored strategies for your life and investments. Unlock bonus content now as a premium subscriber.
Now, depending on who you're talking to, between 2.5 to 3 million Australians live in apartments, and the numbers are growing as many hard-working Aussies are shifting to apartment living for affordability and low-maintenance lifestyle reasons. But like everything post-pandemic, the costs of owning apartments is rising and owners' strata levies are soaring. So to dig into why this is the case and what you can do to keep your costs under control, we're joined by Amanda Farmer from Lawyers Chambers, your go-to strata lawyer specialist with over 20 years of strata experience. So welcome back to Realty Talk, Amanda.
Great to be back, Bushy.
Now, Amanda, this is a bit of an interesting exercise across the board, but I guess to set the scene, what are strata levies and why do strata property owners have to pay them?
Yeah, so strata owners are legally required to pay an amount called a levy, sometimes also called a contribution. That is their share of the costs of maintaining and repairing the common property in a strata building. So that's those shared spaces like the entrance foyer, the lift, the stairwells, the pool or the gym, if you're lucky enough to have those. There are also running costs for the building, electricity, water. There's an insurance premium for the building insurance. And if you have a strata manager, then they have a fee that needs to be paid too. So all of these costs are budgeted for each year, and an amount is levied that each owner must pay as their contribution to these costs. And usually that payment is made on a quarterly basis.
And I'm assuming it probably includes a sinking fund for future renovations, maintenance and whatnot on the property as well, I'm guessing?
Yeah, you got it. So our levy is split into 2 different components, the sinking fund or the capital works fund, we call it in some states, and then the administrative fund. So your administrative fund is more for that day-to-day payment. That's your strata manager. And if you have to engage one of those annoying strata lawyers, the money in the admin fund will pay them too. And then you're exactly right. The capital works or the sinking fund is for that longer term maintenance. And that's where we really should be building up those savings. It's a bit of a rainy day fund there.
Yeah, beautifully said. So as I guess I mentioned in the intro, the cost of living is soaring and strata levies aren't immune to this. So in your experience, what are the specific factors that are causing strata levies to rise?
Yeah, so three things that I would point to. First of all, rising insurance premiums. So a lot of people don't realize this, but the building insurance premium is usually the single largest expense for a strata building, and that building insurance is mandatory. It is required by law, which is a good thing. Premiums are rising across the global insurance market, and strata is certainly not excluded from that. So definitely we're seeing some buildings go to their annual general meeting and say to the strata manager, insurance premiums up by 20%. And the strata manager is saying, is that all? You're lucky. It's just 20% because we're really seeing those premiums rise. Secondly, our buildings are aging and they need more and more expensive maintenance. We've got 40, 50-year-old buildings that have had very little maintenance done on them. We've got waterproof membranes that need replacing, lifts that need upgrading. And in most states now, there are some legal hoops that you have to jump through when it comes to doing this work. It needs to be done properly. We're ensuring that there's good quality remediation being done in strata now, which again is great, but it does lead to more expense.
Yeah.
And thirdly, our buildings are increasingly complex. Owners need and they want services like a strata manager, like a building manager, maybe even an on-site concierge, and these all cost money. Our owners are busier now than in previous generations. They don't really want to volunteer their time, whereas grandma might have been happy to do that at a working bee in the garden on the weekend. They want to bring in the specialists to help, and that's all going to cost a bit of money.
Mm-hmm. So increasing raft, and as our lifestyle expectations increase, our time reduces and our ability to do something occurs with all the liability that's attached to provision of any services now, then I can understand why it's getting more expensive. But look, a number of media reports have suggested that bankruptcies from unpaid strata levies are also on the rise, Amanda. Can a body corporate really bankrupt someone who doesn't pay their levies?
Yeah. May come as a surprise, but the answer to that is yes. Just like any other creditor, a debt can be pursued by a body corporate, by an owner's corporation to that last resort, and it absolutely is a last resort. If you read some of these articles, you'd think that these nasty body corporates are banging on the door of the poor lot owner the week after the bill was due. That is not what I'm seeing happen. It is last in a long line of steps that need to be taken before it gets to that really serious stage. When an owner falls behind in their levies, it's important that there's communication around that, checking if there's any financial hardship. Maybe there's a payment plan that could be considered, seeing if that can be stuck to. And then there's definitely plenty of notices, letters, local court proceedings is the starting point of the litigation, and only that minority of really serious cases that would end up in a federal court bankruptcy.
Yeah, okay. Well, look, you've touched on some of this already then, but can you expand on some of the options for strata owners that are struggling to pay their levies? And better yet, how can levies be kept under control in the first place?
Yeah, keeping the levies under control in the first place is absolutely key. And I say that proactive maintenance when it comes to looking after these buildings, which is a big cost, and looking after the building properly does affect your insurance premium as well, by the way.
Yeah.
But proactive maintenance is always cheaper than reactive maintenance. You certainly don't want to be forced in an emergency situation to be fixing the roof. You certainly don't want to be forced by a court or a tribunal order to be doing work because a lot owner has dragged you through litigation. So plan ahead goes back to that sinking fund, that capital works fund, the rainy day plan. In most states across the country, we have to have a 10-year plan of expenditure for our sinking fund and capital works. So if you're planning that out, contributing a little bit each year, that's going to help you save money in the long run. And if you're facing a major expense that really does need to be funded now and there isn't enough money in the sinking fund, then there are a couple of options for paying for it. You can have a one-off special levy, and this is often where we see some owners end up in financial hardship. They're having to pay a big lump sum very quickly. If you've got owners who can't fund that one-off special levy, then consider a strata loan. That's a unique financial product where the building can actually borrow money. There's no registered mortgages needed. It doesn't involve the individual owners. It's the owner's corporation, the body corporate borrowing the money. Yes, there is a higher interest rate, but for our investors in particular, that may be tax deductible. Really important to get your own financial advice on that. But I often see investors choosing a strata loan over a special levy because they figure it's a better use of their money. Totally get it.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And I'm hearing that to have an active interest in the strata committee or the body corporate is obviously something that people need to be thinking hard about, because it's very easy to wash your hands and then point the finger when things aren't going the way they are. But if there's not open communication, open understanding, that's clearly where some of these issues are likely to arise. So again, we've only really just scratched the surface, but I really want to thank you for bringing all of this to our attention, Amanda. And we suggest that anyone who has an apartment or is interested in buying one to get better informed by tuning into your Strata Property Podcast. And we thank you again for joining us on the Property Hub here today, Amanda.
Thanks so much, Bushy.
Here's how Realty's discovery search works. Now, think of AI as an assistant on your real estate journey. How AI works is by using algorithms and data, the words that you use to describe the type of property you want. By entering what you want, the AI learns and makes predictions or decisions, and then shows you the results. So rather than searching by suburb and then property type and land size and so on, simply type in or say what you want. The more you use Realty's AI discovery search, the more accurate it becomes.
This is Realty Talk, powered by realty.com.au.
Join us for more property news each week with Realty Talk and Get Invested. And you'll do that by subscribing to the Property Hub on all podcast players. Join the conversation on Facebook. Just search for the Property Hub Collective, and please give us a like, and we'd love you to follow as well. Thanks to our supporters and content partners, realty.com.au, BMT Tax Depreciation, Know How Property Finance, and Avira Marketing. Until next week, all the best.